welcome back to the Dan Corder Show. South Africa is a movie. This is the watch party. You know that by now. Right, we're doing something a little bit different tonight for the first time ever, because we always have an interview. But for the first time ever, we are dedicating a full half of the show to our guest today, because he has genuinely, in my opinion, and I think in any sensible person's opinion, revolutionized South African political media. Please make some noise for a man who probably needs no introduction, but I do want to tell you, he is the reason Mashed Up Potatoes is the way he is. Because he lectured mashed up potatoes in first-year university. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh is here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for hosting me, for having me, and it's so great to be on this show. Very cool idea, and I love what you're doing.
I'm asking the questions.
But why are you asking the question?
Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, you know him already, but SMWX, this phenomenal project that is mainly at this point just an extraordinary YouTube channel that manages to bring breaking news, massive insights, and a whole much more. Like, I really do believe this, and you were kind enough to have me on earlier this year, so long ago now, pre the elections.
Yeah.
So long ago, where we were talking about how South African politicians were slowly learning that being online and internet media was the place to be, and you've been able to get the most phenomenal interviews, and very, very often the interviews disagree with each other over time. So late last week you had Albie Sachs talking about how we had the best constitution ever, and then you had John Klopper saying no, it's not. And so you managed to get us into some really interesting conversations. So we're going to speak about a few things tonight, but I want to start with SMWX. How did it happen? How has it gone so well? And you can show off.
SMWX started actually before the last election. So in 2019, I took a bet that digital media was set to explode in South Africa. Turns out I was 5 years off the mark. But it meant that we had to stay consistent for 5 years. And what has truly blown my mind is the non-linearity of the growth of the platform. So year 1 was okay, year 2 was fine, year 3 was not bad, year 4 was kind of good, and then year 5, it has just exploded. But what people don't then appreciate is, like, everyone seems to think that SMWX came on the scene 3 weeks ago, because that's the first interview they've seen, and it's actually an archive of 400 videos,
wow,
as you say, of different opinions on South African politics, society, the economy.
You're getting interviews and news scoops that legacy media are not getting, which is quite extraordinary and really, really, really cool. And so, inevitably, and you and I have spoken about this already, with public profile comes accusations of you working for every party under the sun, week to week, if I understand correctly. So I'm just going to run through a few things that some people on Twitter wanted me to ask you, wanted to ask Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh on the record. Question 1, for how long have you been working for the MK party?
Yeah, look, the MK gig started about a month ago. The MK handover from EFF was pretty seamless. We sat down, we had a meeting. But George Soros also funds my podcast. So Jacob Zuma and George Soros sit down for a weekly meeting.
Really?
Yeah, and they tell me who to interview. And so once George and Jacob, get the agenda going, I'm happy to oblige.
Don't the Oppenheimers provide tea and biscuits to that meeting?
No, yeah, the Oppenheimers are like the layer below George and Jacob. So like there's like a 2-tiered system.
But seriously though, a lot of people try to find agendas within what you do, and that leads to a second question that a lot of people have for you all the time, which we've also spoken about, is that you've got a very particular interviewing style where you, in my opinion, allow people to dig their own holes, and you just allow people to really get out what they think, asking, at best, kind of like helping you along questions without really challenging people. I think there's enormous instrumental value to that, because it means these people come on and really talk to the country and really tell us what they think, and then that can be used for another instrumental value. But what do you say to the criticism from some people who say you're letting these big, powerful people get away with their narrative, their propaganda?
Look, firstly, on the being a propagandist for different parties thing, it's important for people to realize that this platform is very new, and I'm also trying to figure it out as I go along in a way. There's not some grand plan. And often, political parties at different points will want to share their message on my platform. And so I am trying to think through, well, what is too much coverage of MK at a given moment? What is too much coverage of the EFF? And those who watch the channel over a period of time, as you say, will see that there is greater consistency over time. But in a particular moment, people want to hear from a specific quadrant of the political, of the electorate. And so you have to kind of try and balance what people want to hear. Oh, and by the way, the other problem is like every time I do MK content, it goes ballistically viral.
Okay.
So it's like, am I just doing MK interviews, or are people really interested in my MK content?
Sure.
I think that's an interesting question to consider. But look, in terms of the interview style, firstly, in building an alternative platform, you want to first try to do something different.
Yeah.
So I knew that my format had to feel different to mainstream. And the mainstream interview, which I've studied in depth, tried to do a few times myself, is the traditional accountability interview. You sit across from someone and you say, well, you said this one day, you said that the other day, explain to us this tension, or why did you do this? And there's value in that. I don't deny that that's an important accountability function that the media plays. But what I tried to do on my channel is treat the audience as slightly more intelligent and remove myself from the authorial position and try to expose the vulnerability of my guests.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the drawback of that is that what we may lose in accountability, we then gain in vulnerability.
Sure.
But in their vulnerability, politicians, funnily enough, start opening up.
Yeah.
And so what we may not get in accountability, like, why did you commit this act of state capture? We get a story that we've never heard before, which is, I actually felt this way when that happened, or I'm not Julius Malema's brother. I don't think I'm Julius Malema's brother. And I think in addition to the accountability space that we already have, we then learn new things about these public figures on my platform that they wouldn't share. But you would be so surprised. You know how hard it is to get a politician to talk about their emotions and how they felt?
It's not really what they do.
They just don't know how to do it. I'll be like, hey, how did you feel when you became president? And they'll be like, no, our policy is, and I'm like, yes, I know that.
Was that Kgalema Motlanthe?
no guests mentioned. And it's fascinating to me that these people who spend so much time in the public glare actually don't and are now incapable of exposing a side of themselves that we all have, that humanizes them in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that you and I actually spoke about when you had me on your show was how being in the political arena, even just as a personality who does something slightly different to hard news or slightly different to opinionista, this is my position, this is how I feel, is that personal attacks happen so quickly. Yeah. And you actually spoke to me on your show about the complication that you sometimes feel when people say, oh, but you're Dali Mpofu's son, you're just doing your dad's bidding. I'm sure that must have been happening a lot during your section of genuinely groundbreaking MK interviews. You had Floyd, you had Darren Kampfer making his widely discussed like allegiance announcement. And a lot of people were saying, but Dali Mpofu is now MK, he's just Dali's son. Has that been, how do you feel?
Well, my policy is, it's soul destroying, but it's happened for so long now that I've come to expect it and to predict it. But there's a reverse side of the coin, which is that I have never felt so much love either. Like, and in particular, I feel like you get a lot of hate on social media, but you get a lot of love in person. And so when I go out now, whether it's a security guard, petrol attendant, student, I can feel that people are genuinely liking the show. And look, social media is a place where people, vaunt their worst sides often. And I've taken a conscious decision, even though I work on social media, that consumption is different to production.
Yes, correct.
So I produce a lot on social media, but that doesn't mean that I have to consume, because you're definitely feeling this now, I'm sure. Like, there's a point where your social media platform changes from just being your Twitter to being like an endless stream of everyone's, and it's different to like a personal social media channel.
Totally.
I don't know.
No one will ever find my burner account.
Oh, okay.
Surely you have a burner account?
We need to look out for this. We do. I don't have a burner account, but one of my camera crew has a burner account, and he constantly comments on what I'm wearing on the show. He's just like, Sizwe, this shirt, like what? So, but I don't know. We're in a really interesting period just in human history where social media and the cacophony becomes so loud. And I genuinely think one of the most important life skills you can develop right now in the world is how to separate social media noise from signal.
Totally.
And that's what I really tried to do with SMWX, because the noise has been so loud over the last month. But if I look at the signal and I look at how many people are watching,
sure,
how many people are liking, then I know that the noise is actually a byproduct of the deeper impact of the channel.
Absolutely. Okay, Sizwe, many people don't know this, or they do know this kind of, but you wrote a really important book a number of years ago, which was a very, very powerful critique about how a lot of okay, maybe I'll suggest you a new logline, a new tagline for your book. Modern South Africa is just apartheid with better branding. Is that largely the rub of the book?
In some ways, yes. We have a certain brokenness at the base of our society, which we can trace back to apartheid and colonialism. And despite important change since 1994, that fundamental inequality has largely remained unresolved. And so we have tampered with the margins without really addressing the long-standing structural inequalities.
Sure. Do you think governments should go about trying to achieve transformation, economic transformation and social?
I mean, the first thing would be, it would be great if everyone just had electricity, water, you know, the basics. At this point, we're just begging for the basics. You know, I find it hilarious in a moment where there's so many countries on the move where we're just like, if we could just get 1% economic growth, we would be doing so well. So I think at a start, let's get the basics right. But here's the thing about the basics. I think this GNU government is all about, hey, let's do the basics, let's govern, let's bring in investment, let's fix potholes, let's get sanitation right. And it remains to be seen whether they'll be able to do that. But even if we get the basics right, even if electricity flows, even if everyone has water, we're just going to have an even more efficient, unequal society.
Sure.
It's going to take 10 minutes to drive to Khayelitsha instead of 25. But Khayelitsha is still going to exist. And what I fail to see across the political spectrum is the imagination to truly uproot these structural problems which we have inherited, to take bold decisions, to remake spatial relations, yes, to get serious about land and economic inequality. And for goodness sake, just do something different. What I find sad about the current political moment is that the electorate begged for change. Right? And what we got instead was, well, we'll just keep everything the same despite the change.
Sure, and that actually leads to my next question. So the South African political system is split into many smaller parties, which splits the vote. It forces things like coalitions. Some people think that's a really good thing because you don't want to have to choose between two bad options and just kind of go along with the least worst one like the United States does, for example. But what that does mean is a more fragmented political system where you are hoping that smaller political parties with their clump of votes actually do work well together. Yeah. Do you think that this new wave of many smaller political parties in South Africa is good for us?
Not necessarily. I think we're a country with more and more parties and fewer options.
Okay.
And there's an assumption that when you have more parties, you have more to choose from. But not necessarily in South Africa, because it's just like various parties, and when you look at the actual options, I still think we're quite impoverished. I don't think any party has fully got the following combination right.
Yeah.
Be unapologetically pro-racial justice, pro-gender justice and equality, and unapologetically seek to address South Africa's deep-seated historical oppression.
You don't think any party is doing that?
So that's one part of the formula, right? And at the same time, be able to convince people that you can govern effectively,
sure,
that you can deliver the basics, and that the economy won't implode while you do it.
Okay.
There's a formula there that can be struck, but it's either you get the people who speak about oppression, or those who feel like they can govern, or those who just don't do either. But nobody seems to find that magic center where they can convince people that they'll do both. And that's where I feel the true option of the future will come from.
Yeah, because it's interesting because I think that the ANC over its entire history has had all the right politics.
Oh, yeah.
But in the last 30 years, none of the execution, or at least, okay, let me be fair here. RDP was very good for 10 years. Rollouts of basic services until probably halfway through Mbeki was very good. And since then, it's been almost all awful. And they've suffered at the ballot box. They've suffered these extraordinary collapses. But I also just feel like there's a lack of political talent, because if MK hadn't come along and essentially espoused previous era ANC would have still got about 50%. That's crazy to me that would happen. And so I do hear you, and I worry that other political parties are just not providing South Africans a reason to go out and vote. More, they're just relying on ANC voters to not bother to vote for anybody at a particular election, which is why I have now 3 big questions for you, Sizwe and Mpofu-Walsh. The first one is, do you think the ANC can make a comeback?
You're so right. I mean,
it's a yes/no question. And then we'll get the justification.
No.
You don't think they can make a comeback? Why not?
Now you ask for that. I think there is something really broken at the heart of the ANC, which it is not brave enough to confront.
Okay.
And it would prefer to paper over the cracks. We'd all love, I mean, the quickest route to liberating South Africa would just ANC, get your house in order, and then we can all move. We'd all love that, right? But the tragedy is that many of us have had to give up on that hope somewhere along the road of the last 30 years.
Sure. Okay. That's very interesting. So they are irredeemable.
In a word, yes.
Okay. Okay. The Democratic Alliance, whether they like it or not, flatlined.
Speaking of irredeemable.
Don't you have Helen Zille on your show in like a few days?
I do.
So what a lot of people don't know is that the DA went up 1% in the last election, but they actually lost 1 million votes. So the DA went up in total percentage share because many people didn't bother to go vote. And some people believe that the DA has now plateaued and have no real aspirations on appealing to more people and maybe one day becoming the dominant party in the country. What do you think the DA's chances are of ever breaking higher than low to mid-20s?
I think the DA is stuck there. We have to give them credit. They have governed relatively well in the areas which they govern, and there are reasons for that. I still don't think it's objectively or in real terms good enough, but it's better relatively than many shocking municipalities in South Africa.
Sure.
But it's that thing I said about South Africa's history. You cannot run away from that. You can try.
Racial justice.
Gendered inequalities, spatial injustice, which is linked to that history. You have to grasp that nettle. You have to confront that. And the DA has failed over a long period of time to really resonate with people. And so as people hold their nose to vote for the ANC, I think they also hold their nose to vote for the DA and say, look, I know that they may not be very strong on these long-term social issues, but hey, I just want some water in my area.
Yeah, I hear you.
And ultimately, I don't think the DA will be able to break through that barrier until they can convince people that they truly grasp the history of our country.
Sure. Okay. And then final question, is the EFF in a death spiral? It's a big question.
It is.
The EFF has been, they are the true victims of MK at this point. I think it's comfortable to say we thought the ANC were the true victims around the election, but the EFF are the true victims of the MK party. And they're about to have an elective conference where they're going to try and recover any mojo that they can. Do you think that they're in a death spiral? Yes or no? And then why?
Yes and no.
Do I have a politician or a broadcaster in front of me?
Let me go no-ish.
No-ish.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not in a death spiral-ish.
Yeah, more no than yes. The EFF are in their feels right now and are making some irrational decisions because of, I think, how surprised they have been, how taken by surprise they have been by all of these MK departures. But I still think that Julius Malema is, like him or loathe him, a talented politician who will always command a certain public support. So IFF is in a very difficult point and may be a diminished force, but I don't see it being completely obliterated from the political scene. Whether it morphs into one or the other parties as a political force is a possibility, but I don't think that voice is going away anytime soon.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait for the next bombshell. Thank you so much. Isn't he phenomenal? Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that is our show. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back on Monday for the last episode of the Dan Corder Show. Not forever haters on Twitter for this year, especially if you're one of those alt-white haters. Remember, you can watch all of our episodes absolutely free on enca.com. Have a beautiful week. Good night, everybody.